This is IBM Museum, and I still have that big stack of systems behind me, but we're just going to work on the upper part today. I'm focusing on the Model 3026 that is on top, and I only have one of the zip drives, the parallel port model that's powered up and connected to it. I do have the video capture connected to it as well. So let's get turned around and start investigating. So we're going to go through, and I've got my go-to diskette drive that's connected that I can go through and read a floppy, just because this drive is not acting very functional. And I want to go through and just show that this is able to connect up to the zip drive. I don't have it set up as automatic, but let's go through and get the unit powered up. Okay. And this is one of the preventative things I do is I'm, go through and unplug power, kind of handy sometimes, just to make sure that there's not a surge or anything else that comes through. And let me get my internal webcam up, and then that way you can see what I'm talking about. I went through and flipped the switch, and there was just no reaction at all. And so I reached over and just plugged the power cord into the back of the drive, excuse me, into the back of the system. And I do have the zip drive on top powered up independently of that and already connected as well. And this is at 4 megabyte of planar RAM, really kind of nice to have that. And of course, it's got to go through and count all that as well. And then it's got the functional 45 megabyte proprietary drive that was released late in the Model 3026 lifetime. And that's absolutely fantastic that that still functions at some level as well. I need to go through and back it up, and I'm going to use that as a little bit of testing on the BIOS levels and things like that of the systems. It does take a little bit of time for it to get going, but we're booted off of it. So one of the first things I want to do is to get onto the A drive, because I do have that beyond copying over the files to this diskette. In fact, I've copied over the guest INI, and I could even run that from a diskette, or can try to do that rather than where I even have it on the hard drive. And of course, it's got that guest INI, and it's got the driver files there. And so that'd probably be a good test. But I do want to run through the LPT test first. Okay. And so this is kind of interesting. It shows, again, the LPT1 is even at the address of 03 BC. And that is, that happens on some IBM systems, in notably when IBM first had what was called the monochrome adapter that also had a parallel port on it. The parallel port was set up in that 03 BC arrangement. That is used on some of the IBM systems and is not quite as common on the clone side as well. And we do see that the read back after output is okay, but the bidirectional capability is listed as failed here. And that's just kind of, that really interests me. And then of course we learned to discard that LPT4 being the extended BIOS data area segment. That is not a real parallel port. It's not LPT4. Now, and I may go through on debug and kind of show that line of information where the serial ports and parallel ports are held in a memory area that makes it easy for the system to identify what is what serial and parallel ports are at what addresses on the system. And I'll probably go through and do that with the focus I want to do with an adapter I'm going to put in here. But let's go through, let's even see if we can run this guest program. And that's the Iomega program that came with the zip drive. We do have that parallel port unit connected up. And I think I have all the files that I need. This is the point where my maxed out MUL30 stops. It just find a drive letter for your Iomega drive and it just halts. And this does take some time. I was giving it a little bit of time with no drive letters were added. Need to find out why that is. Because it's probably not going to identify. Okay, so let's go over to the C drive. And I think I have it in zip tools. Okay, and I'll go through and eject the diskette. So here we've got that 4.2 driver version of the Iomega utility here. Let's go through and run guest from here. Because it should find the Iomega drive. It's connected up to the parallel port. And it's worked for me before. Okay, there, that's better. So I might be missing some file on that diskette. That might be a little bit handy to understand. So we'll go to the D. And of course, I don't want to move anything over to this 45 megabyte hard drive that's on this. I just don't have the room or anything else to do that aspect. So let me go through and go back to the C drive. One thing I want to do, I can go through and type the guest INI file, because I thought that this is going through. Yeah, it's got the parallel port stuff listed as that nibble and nibble 2. So it's still going through and using this in nibble mode. It's not using the bidirectional mode. And I want to investigate that a little bit more of why this is a PS2 MUL 286. It should have that bidirectional capability turned on, just like on the Max MUL 30 that I have. That's just confusing me that the bidirectional parallel port is not on going through and powering up the system. So I did go through and I've got a starter diskette for the 3286. So I've put that in the diskette drive. we're going to go through and we're going to reboot the machine and boot off that starter diskette, because I want to look at the capabilities of or the settings that how the system goes through and identifies that parallel port that's on the planar. Okay. Okay. So we're going to go through to the set configuration just to kind of look. Okay, so let's go through and we might as well go through and select that change configuration. And of course, I ran this right after I got the system. So here we've got the parallel port and we've got brackets around it. And so I want to go through and like toggle through the settings for that parallel port. It's listed as parallel 1 before. Okay. Or just even disabled. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to select parallel 2. Okay. So let's go through and F10. And of course, we didn't say anything about bi-directional anything, although we did change, this should change the address. So let's go through and escape. The start diskette is a little bit different in the keyboard selections. Rather than F3, it's just the escape. And we'll go through and escape. Okay. Okay, enter to restart the system. Guess I pressed escape before. And we're going to get this other diskette, the test LPT, ready again. I should just load this on the hard drive. And that 03BC is a somewhat abbreviated port, effectively, for the addressing that it has. And we're going to see if that's a factor. Okay, let's go through and put in that diskette and go over to that drive. And let's do that LPT underscore test again. Okay, so we see that bidirectional capability has failed, even with it at that 0378 for the LPT1 is a changed address. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to continue with a line of thinking that I'm doing here. Let's go through, and it's not going to require me to go through and run the configuration, I don't believe. Let me get back over to the camcorder. I can go through and get off the internal webcam. And so what I have planned, and I couldn't do this on the Maxwell 30 because I have all the IO slots filled, all that ISA bus. But I do have some of these IO boards. And this is just with a Startech chipset, and that's the 16C 452. What that chipset normally does is it has two serial ports. You've got a single one here and the header for a second one, and then it has a parallel port on that as well. And this supports a bidirectional parallel port. That should be in those jumper settings. And I need to go through, I've got manuals for them. And I picked up a number of these, just new old stock years and years ago. Let's go through, we've got the getting started. And so right off the bat, here is the page that has the IBM compatible mode or the bidirectional mode. And it says it's a default. In fact, I got to look on, it's funny. Okay, let me look at another. Okay, because some of these boards are different. In fact, I'll even have to find out. This is what I noticed. Is you look at this one, and the blue jumper pins really give it. I mean, show up on the board. Let's look at this one as a comparison. Pulling it right out of the bag. And look at that. One of these doesn't have it's otherwise identical. And it's actually pin 1 on this main Startech chip that goes through and sets that bidirectional mode. So, and I've got, and it's probably hard to focus since it's so little. I have a spider dropping down from the overhead, and I didn't even think that thing is big enough to have enough silk in it. I have to make sure I avoid her as I move around. But yeah, this, and of course, that's just the TI equivalent. That's the 16C552. Now, the 16452 is a where the UARTs, the serial port controller chips don't have a 16-byte FIFO buffer. They just have a single byte buffer. And so this is a lesser adapter, actually. Despite looking very similar, we want to go through and we want to use this one. There's a few others I have here. At least they have that same jumper. And it even marks the silk screen uni and bi. And we have it in the bidirectional. Now, it's going to be a little bit, since we went through and changed the address of the planar parallel port. Okay. And here it's got for the serial ports. And it's got configuring the LPT ports. Okay. So okay, so we want to go through and we want to use that since the system is on that 0378. We want to use that 0278 and IRQ5 probably. And so even on the camcorder, I can see this better than right up front. So we have the jumpers over here. We've got it actually set to 0278 right now with this jumper here and IRQ5. So we've got this set up correctly. Now we want to also avoid any conflict with the planar serial port as well. And it looks like both of these serial ports are set up as the COM3, COM4 rather than COM1, COM2, and have those stagger jumpers each to use a separate interrupt line as well, even though that sticker kind of hides things. But this board looks like it's ready to go. Parts falling from my chair. Okay, so we're going to go through and we're going to power this down. I will pop the adapter in place, just in this lower I/O slot. Okay. Just going through with the adapter. Seems to be okay. Yeah, the notch on this board is just too much for that, amazingly. Just doesn't drop in place like it should. Wow. We might have to go through and yeah, I'm going to go through and pause the video while I work with this to get this in a better position. So, wow, that was quite a challenge to get that in there. I had to go through and even make the opening for the end of the bracket a little bit bigger just to get in there. And it is still very tight. Let's go through to get back to the system. And I don't need to necessarily connect up the zip drive or anything else like that. But I want to go through and for a troubleshooting step, I want to have a port that I know is in a bidirectional mode. And to see how that LPT test program defines anything, whether it's got a hopefully the thing works right without a bug or anything like that. Okay, so it detects that configuration change. And so it's good that I do have that starter diskette. And I don't know, other than just running through the system. And that's interesting for adding an IO card that doesn't conflict with the system otherwise. I went through ahead of time and checked that. And of course, normally the reference diskettes do that with the microchannel. They go through non-volatile memory. I'm not sure what it's talking about there. All we're going through is doing an IO board. We're not going through and I haven't changed memory. I didn't go through and bump memory, and it went through and it read it correctly. I saw it count to 4 megabyte before. I don't know. That's just a strange reaction. I don't know why it complained about the memory changing when we go through and added an adapter to it that shouldn't interfere with memory in any form. Counts the same amount. That I don't understand what went through and what might have changed to this at all. The 163 error. I was just thinking I'd be able to drop an adapter in here, and maybe it didn't like me messing around with that riser, or I didn't bump anything else. Okay, what are you going to tell me? Time and date not set. Well, going through and pulling the riser, that just upset things and went through and reset to default configuration. Maybe when I worked with the riser, everything was powered off. But what can you do? So we'll get the time and date set correctly. Wow, it's getting late. Okay. And escape to quit, enter continue. So apparently just me going through, and I pulled the riser and had to really to handle the system with that, but I didn't have it powered up during the time, and just wonder if there was something that went through when I pulled the riser that went through and maybe reset the configuration. Just a kind of an interesting experience. So it wasn't necessarily that the memory had an issue, just it looks like it reset to a more default configuration, lost all the time and date and the configuration. And the interesting thing is there, And I could have gone through and checked that configuration, but that probably even reset the port back to that onboard parallel port on the planar, probably set that back to 03 BC. I won't go into the star diskette anymore. I'm just going to go through and I'll run the utility that LPT test will tell us. And we learned that that address is not the issue anyway. So we're going to get that diskette in there. And like I say, I don't even necessarily want to run the zip drive at all. We've done that previously. We know that that initializes correctly on this model. And I learned that I probably need to move still some files over for testing the zip drive on that Maximal 30, just because what I have on the diskette seems incomplete. And I'll probably go through and create that on the hard drive structure. But let's go through and go to the A drive. We're going to run our LPT test. Okay. So it did revert for LPT1 on the planar to that 03 BC address. Now for the LPT2 that we have there on address 0278, it says the readback after output is okay, and the bidirectional capability is okay, but it says that input equals low for whatever that may mean. But it does go through and shows that that adapter we put in there has a bidirectional port, and this LPT test reads that correctly, even if it says input low or whatever else that may mean. And of course, it's still going through and showing that extended BIOS data area segment. And so let's go back to the C drive. The last step I want to do is going through the debug. And if we do a dump 40, maybe I should write that out fully, 0040:0. And we're just going to do a length of 10 hex. You just give us one line of information here. And so what that does, let's go through and I'll press enter a couple times just to get that a little bit higher on the screen. So left to right, we see that F803, and that is the serial port that's on the planar. All the rest, that 0000000000, all that shows that there is no other serial port that's set up on the system. And that's interesting in a way, because I thought on that adapter that we have in there, it was set to COM3 and COM4. So that really kind of confuses me there. I may need to go through and check that out a little bit more of why it's not identifying those other serial ports. And then we have the for the BC03, that's that planar, it's inverted. It's that big Indian format. And the big Indian or little Indian? Well, anyway, but that's the first, that's the planar parallel port of 03 BC. And then the second parallel port that the system finds is at 0278 address. And so that's how you could go through and see and use debug to show those the serial ports and parallel ports on the system. I've got to go through and check out a little bit further of why the serial ports on that adapter are not showing up at all. And I may swap over to the other adapters I have here and just to kind of see. In fact, it might even be good to use that adapter that didn't have the jumper setting for the bidirectional port to find out what it is set to. So let me go through. And not that I want to, I don't know why I did a dump, but let's just go through and quit debug. Let's power the system off. And I'm going to go through, I'll switch back over to the camcorder, but I'm going to go through and I'm going to pause during the time of working with the system a little bit more here to get that other adapter in place. Now, that adapter went in a lot easier than this one did, and it's probably just because I happened to go through and work with the that slot. And so the parallel port is set up the same on that adapter I put in there. The serial ports are set up a little bit differently. For the adapter that went in there, it's got set to the COM2 and COM3 for the attached serial port. So that shouldn't be any conflict with what's in place, and we'll see if it's able to identify it. And then that adapter that's in there does not have the bidirectional, unidirectional jumper there, and that just goes from that pin 1 of that chip that's mid, it's right in the middle of the row. It's got a dot actually on it, and that just goes through and either ties that high or ties that low. So let's go through. Get to the VGA video capture. And notice that time I didn't pull the riser or anything else. I didn't disturb anything. It didn't, want me to go through and run that starter diskette. And we're going to go through and do debug first. And remember, we just do a dump. And we can abbreviate this time. The 40:0 length 10 hex. And there we get, it shows that 02F8, at least it shows up another serial port. It's just not showing that third serial port for some reason. And we see the LPT1 and LPT2 there of the same address that they had on the other adapter. So we're going to quit. We will get over to the A drive. And we're going to do that LPT _test. Okay. So on this adapter, it's got that pin 1 tied, I think, low. I'll have to look at and familiarize myself with that. But the it's not set to the bidirectional mode. It's just it defaults into a unidirectional mode, and so at least we know that that adapter missing that jumper setting, that it doesn't do that. So I think that's been a little bit of enough of an investigation here of testing things out. Again, for these PS2s, I don't know why that they're not defaulting into that bidirectional mode right off the bat, right from the boot up. And of whether that was more of a software control or something else. On the Maximal 30, I know how to go through and toggle that mode. And of course, coming up with a utility that loads before the, maybe I can get that zip driver, the Iomega version, that zip driver working. And I got a receipt for the Palm DOS, but I have not seen a confirmation of my order there. They say that it's normally addressed by email. And I haven't seen that come through. I may have to check. I went in and checked spam folders and things like that. So I may have to reach out and see, or maybe it's just taking a little bit longer. But if you thought that this video was informative for you, you learned something, you enjoyed it, go ahead and click on that like button. It turned out to be a little bit longer than what I would have liked. That's fine. That's fine. As long as we went through and learned some progress. So we had some little hiccups that we had to react to as well. But we learned a little bit more to the goings on here. And I learned that I have an incomplete guest setup from Iomega on that diskette, and I'll have to copy more files and get all that for the 4.2 over to my Maximal 30 and see if I can make it work, because I do have that NEC V30 CPU that's supposed to handle things. I just don't know how far back I have to go on the Iomega drivers themselves. And once I get that Palm DOS in, I can go through and test that and see how that goes as well. Because I do even have that Mul 30 the minimal Mul 30 that I had up before, that just has still the 8086 CPU, and it's got that 720 KB drive. And so just like the convertible, the PC convertible that I plan to use the Palm Zip with, that'll be interesting to test and to get that driver loaded on boot up. But so if you're not subscribed to my channel, please consider so. Channel is still growing. Recommend it to your friends that might be interested in this content too. But that's all I have for now. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.